Good to be back, and like she mentioned, pepper jelly. How many of you folks have ever had pepper jelly before? It's one of my favorites, but I gotta tell you, I've only had pepper jelly for a couple of years, and the first time that I ever was exposed to it was actually from our VP here, and she asked me to have a pepper jelly workshop, and I thought, no offense, but that sounds kind of gross. Pepper jelly is not, when you think jelly, it's not the traditional thing. But it is a very, very popular recipe. It is obviously, with the peppers in it, it makes for a savory variety of jelly instead of a really sweet one, more like a berry or a strawberry type of jelly. And technically it's a jam. So we'll start with that. A jelly is usually some spread that has been made from the juice of a fruit, and a jam has pieces or whole parts of the fruit in it. So if you can kind of see a little bit there, and if not, I'll show you as we go through. We're using the pieces of peppers that's going to be mixed in with our syrup, our sugar and our vinegar and some other items in it. So it does have pieces of pepper in it, and therefore it makes it a jam. Kind of a misnomer, but we'll continue to call it pepper jelly. The pepper jelly recipe, like any canning recipe, you want to make sure that you go through it first, ensure that you have all of your ingredients. Obviously for the demonstration purposes today, we have everything pre-measured, but honestly, I do the same thing at home. I go through my recipe and I make sure that I have everything washed and cleaned and sterilized, and that I have time set aside, and then I start going through the recipe and preparing each of my ingredients so that I don't have to worry about in the middle of mixing and putting things together that I have to run to the other side of my kitchen or go into my pantry to get items out. They're all going to be spread out right in front of you. In addition to going through your recipe and preparing your ingredients, you also want to prepare all of your equipment that you're going to need in order to make that recipe. And some of you were with me a little bit ago and I walked through the equipment. If you're new, not a problem. We're going to walk through the equipment again, and I have some new pieces of equipment that we're going to use for this recipe. Regular everyday home kitchen items that you're going to want to have in order to make this recipe is a good sturdy cutting board on your countertop so that you can actually chop up your peppers, some bowls and some measuring cups in order to measure out each of your individual ingredients. You also want to have a good sharp knife so that you can go through your peppers. We're going to be using both a sweet bell pepper as well as a jalapeno pepper. You want to have a spoon so that you can stir up all of the mixture into your pot. You also want to have a ladle. Your ladle is going to be what you use after you stir and make the actual jelly that you can put into your jars that way. And you also want to have a stock pot. Some of you may not have a traditional canner at home, and maybe you're just wanting to start to ease and get into canning. Well, Ball makes that really easy for you with the Ball Home Canning Discovery Kit. The Home Canning Discovery Kit is going to give you everything that you see here, which is the rack that's going to fit inside of a standard stock pot, so you don't even have to go out and get a canner. Canner makes it really nice if you are going to do a lot of canning, but if you're just going to can every once in a while for some gifts or to maybe get your feet wet with canning, use your stock pot at home, and then this takes the place of a traditional canning rack and will help keep your jars off the bottom of the stock pot, and it holds all of your jars into one place. Speaking of jars, the Canning Discovery Kit comes with 3 traditional mouth pint-sized jars, and that is good for any little starter batch of anything you're making, or like pepper jelly that we're going to make today. It also comes with a how-to guide that includes some recipes, and inside is a pretty cool tool. It has a measurement tool on one of the pages, so if you don't have the handy tool of a bubble freer and a measurement tool that we used earlier, no worries. The Canning Discovery Kit already has the measurements marked for you to help you measure out your headspace. And if you're not familiar with headspace or how to do that, not a problem. That's why I'm here. We're going to go through each of those steps for you. Other items that are very useful to have when canning in general, and especially with our pepper jelly today, a funnel. It's a nice collapsible funnel. I was talking earlier, it not only is good to have to fit large things through like peaches, but also anything really sticky like the jam that we're going to make today. I don't care how talented you are. Taking the ladle and trying to pour into the mouth of a jar, that's just asking for a mess. Why make the mess? And waste all of that yummy jam too. So instead, using a funnel is going to help ensure that all of the sweet, yummy pepper jelly is going to get down into our jar. And with it being collapsible, it works very well for storage. You can put that right into your drawer and just collapse it down. It does fit both with traditional mouth jars as well as wide mouth jars. Speaking of jars, today we're going to use a jelly jar. This is an 8-ounce jelly jar, and our recipe is going to make 6 of these jelly jars. It has the straight walls, so these jars are not only good for making a jelly and hot water bath preserving like we're going to do today, but you can also use these in your freezer. So it's, like all of the jars, really good for multiple purposes. Other canning specific items that we're going to use for this recipe are jar lifter. Jar lifter is exactly that. It's going to help you lift up your jar and put it down into the hot water for your actual canning process, and when that process is done, be able to lift it out to keep your hands nice and safe. Our other item that we're going to use specific to canning is the SureTight band tool. The SureTight band tool is a great way to ensure that every time you put the band on your jar that it's the same tightness each time. You don't have to worry, oh, did I not tighten it enough? Did I tighten it too much? No worries, this is going to go right onto your band and make sure that you have a good tight seal every time. And we'll walk through each of these equipment and make sure that you guys know how to use them. The other things that I have my jars sitting over in a crock pot. That is keeping my jars, even though I've already washed them with some hot soapy water. You also can wash them in your dishwasher, not a problem with that. But once you wash them, you want to make sure that they're in either a stock pot of water, in your canner for example, or in the case that I have here, in a crock pot to keep them nice and hot. That's going to both sterilize them as well as get the top rim of the jar nice and ready to make a really good seal with your 2-piece lid that you're going to put on it later on. In addition to my jars being in the crock pot, I do have a stock pot of water. That stock pot, as I mentioned earlier, is going to act as our canner with our canning discovery kit. And it has about 3/4 of the way filled with water, so it's nice and coming up to a boil, so it's ready for when we want to put our jars down in there. I have a stock pot. So this is one of the things I want to tell you. Even if you're making just a small batch of jelly, don't try to make it in a small pot. Jelly is something that you want to give room for it to grow in the pot. If you've ever tried to make anything with a lot of sugar, it's going to expand and it's going to get big. And if you try to use just a small saucepan, what's going to happen is as that heats up and boils, it's going to fill all over, and now you're going to have a nice jam flavored stove, which I don't think anybody wants that. So just go ahead and save yourself the cleanup. Use a good heavy stainless steel heavy bottom stock pot in order to make your jelly in there. Speaking of jelly, let's go ahead and get started. I mentioned for our pepper jelly, we are using both a sweet green bell pepper as well as jalapeno pepper. That's going to give us the good sweetness that you get from the bell pepper, in addition to a little bit of a kick from the jalapeno. Now, if you like to have more of a kick, you can add in a heartier, a habanero or a poblano, some kind of pepper that has a little more kick to it. But this is going to give a nice mild taste to it with a little hint of a kick, nothing too major. And don't worry, you'll get a chance to taste this here in a bit. Now that we are ready to work on our recipe, you notice I'm putting on gloves. Of course, when you're cooking at home, it's your food. Wash your hands, make sure that you're being smart. You are talking about preserving your food. You don't want to have germs trapped in your jar. So wash your hands. The reason why I'm wearing gloves is because of this guy. If you have never been around jalapeno peppers, there's nothing to worry about. They're not super intense, but they do have heat in them, and the capsaicin oil that's found inside any of the hot peppers, if it gets on your skin, it's going to start to burn a little bit, and worse, if it's hot like today and you're cooking in your kitchen and you go to wipe your face, now you have that hot oil on your face, and that's not a very fun afternoon to have. So put on your rubber gloves anytime that you're cutting your hot pepper. I'm going to go ahead and show you how to do that. You want to cut off the top, the stem part, and then slice your pepper right down the middle. You can see I have seeds that have already started to come out. If you like a little more heat, you're welcome to leave the seeds in there. I will let you know that I personally find over time, seeds of peppers will start to turn a little bit bitter in just about anything that you can where they're still in there. So removing those is going to take out a little bit of heat, but it's also going to prevent your jelly from ending up a little bitter. If you notice, I used a spoon in order to scrape out all of those seeds. I just went right along the membrane of the seed sac in there and got all my seeds out. Do it again for you here. So just take any spoon, go right at the base, one end of your pepper, and scoop that out. Get all that membrane out of there. That membrane that holds the seed sac in there, I also find that removing it is going to help eliminate any cloudiness or any floating in your jelly. Over time, that seems to break down a little bit faster than the actual pepper itself, and it just doesn't make for a very pretty jelly. You want to be able to make something that you can show off and share with your friends and family, whether as gifts or something that you're going to pull out for a party, and there's no need to can something that just doesn't look very good. Now, I am hand cutting these peppers. You can do this in a food processor as well. So instead of cutting after you've already removed all of those seeds, you could just plop those down, your peppers, both the sweet and the jalapeno peppers, down into your food processor and do that, run it until you hit a fine chop. So to give you an idea of a fine chop that I'm using, let's see if you guys can see this, just tiny little pieces is about all I'm doing. That is a really good thing because one of the most popular ways that pepper jelly is served is on cream cheese and crackers, which you guys will get to taste in a little bit. And having a nice fine chop just makes it so that you can have that spread out on a cracker and not have to worry about having large pieces of pepper on your cracker. All right. Oh, great.
Cast. Joyce from Connecticut asked, can you mix red and green peppers?
That is a great question, Joyce. So yes, she's wondering, can you mix both red and green peppers? Any of the sweet bell peppers. If you want to make it super festive, throw in yellow and orange and red and green. Make it a whole party. A colorful pepper jelly is perfectly fine. Not a problem. I'm going to go ahead and start my actual jelly. I have a 1.25 cups of cider vinegar that I've put in my stock pot. And I also am going to throw in 4.5 cups of green peppers. That is the sweet bell pepper. And the jalapeno peppers, we've got a 1/2 cup. So to give you an idea, that 4.5 cups, this is just a 1/2 cup. A little bit of heat is going to go a long way in this recipe. And again, if you're more adventurous, you can add more and add in less of the sweet bell pepper. But total, it's about 5 cups worth of peppers that you're putting in there. You're going to bring those up to a boil in your pan. That's going to both cook the peppers as well as allow the vinegar to heat up enough to start breaking down and pulling out some of the rich sweetness inside of those peppers. Bring that up to a boil. All right, go ahead and clear this out of our way so we can get ready when it comes time to can. Any questions while I move on to the next step? Any questions from the audience here about peppers or pepper jelly?
I really don't have a question, but I have a solution.
Oh, please.
If you happen to do the peppers and get them on the hot peppers on your hands, you can scrub your hands with toothpaste or Crest toothpaste, and it takes the burnout right away.
That is a great tip. I don't know if you all heard that, but if you get the hot pepper oil on your hands, if you rub it with toothpaste, it sounds like that's going to get it off. We grow a lot of peppers, so even though I try to wear gloves every summer, I end up getting some. I'm going to have to use that tip. I'm going to have to try that.
Usually it was Crest, but whatever I had handy, and it works.
Oh, okay. Very nice. Very good. Any other questions? If you raise your hands, Kristen will come around and get those for you. All right. Got this almost to a boil. Now, some folks prefer to add green food coloring to this recipe just to make for a richer green color. Personally, I think the peppers are pretty enough just as is, but it's your own liking. If you want to add some, now would be the good time to add it, is in there with the vinegar, so that that color can also get equally dispersed among all of the peppers that are moving around in there. Once this comes to a boil, what we're going to add to it is pectin. So let's go ahead and talk about pectin for a moment. This is a natural product, comes from fruit, and the recipe that we're using today is low sugar. We're going to use both sugar, and what makes it low sugar is we're going to supplement some of the traditional sugar with some honey. If you want to take out even more of the sugar and supplement with either a sugar substitute or more honey, you're welcome to do that. And the pectin that you want to use is designed for a low sugar recipe. So the low sugar pectin, what it's going to do is pectin acts as a gelling agent, and that's going to help pull all of our ingredients together and give it its nice body and hold everything together. Otherwise you end up with more of like a syrup, which could also be good too. Pepper syrup. Maybe I'll have to try that sometime. All right, there we go. Our pectin, what we're going to do is add it very slowly. I will let you know, because it is a gelling agent, just kind of pour away from you. You don't want to get that stuck in your sinuses or anything. It's not a lot of fun. It's kind of like if you've ever mixed together gelatin, and similar to that. And the amount that we're using is 3 tablespoons of our low sugar pectin. This also comes, some of you heard me mention the flex batch ingredients earlier. Flex batch just means that it's going to come in that container and allow you to make either a lot or a little, depending on however much produce, however much you are ready to make at a time. And I'm stirring this up. That's going to help incorporate the pectin throughout all of the vinegar, all of the ingredients in there.
How long does the flex batch last? Say I don't use it all this season, will it still be good next season?
Great question. So she's curious, how long will the flex batch ingredient, the actual product, last if you don't use it all this season? I believe it lasts for a year to year and a half. Obviously you want to make sure that it's stored in your pantry in a nice dry place. Otherwise, if it's open and you don't have a lid on it, it is going to soak up moisture out of the air and just make for gel in a jar, I guess. All right. Got that boiling. The next thing that we want to add is our sugar. Again, either sugar substitute, all honey, whatever works for you. We're using 1 cup of honey today and 2 cups of granulated sugar. Of course, honey being viscous already, you don't have to worry about it incorporating too much into the recipe, whereas the granulated sugar, we want to make sure that we get that stirred around in there so that it can completely dissolve. Great.
Is the honey sugar substitution 1-to-1?
Yes. Always read whatever the sugar substitute, especially things like Splenda. You want to check those just because of flavor sometimes. To a 1/2 cup, for example, of sugar to a 1/2 cup of Splenda, the flavor may be a little more intense with a sugar substitute like Splenda. So always read the package of your sugar substitute. If you cut the sugar out, you need to keep in mind the volume. So that's the main thing of the 1-to-1 ratio. You want to make sure that you're keeping the volume the same, because if you cut it out, then what happens is you're just not going to have as much product to mix in and fill all of your jars. All right, get all those filled. Just going to continuously stir this. That's going to do a couple of things. Again, it's going to help dissolve all of the sugar and the honey that's in there. It's also going to help that pectin hold on to each of the ingredients that are in there and start bringing it all together in an actual gel formation. We're going to do a hard boil here for 3 minutes. That's pretty important. The hard boil If you folks aren't familiar with a hard boil is not just a couple bubbles here and there. It's not just a party of bubbles in your pot. It is a explosion of bubbles in your pot. You want to make sure that things are really popping, they're really boiling, they're really moving around in there. You're going to start to see the volume in your stock pot come up. It's going to grow a little bit. That's that sugar starting to really dissolve and hold on to all of the ingredients in there. That hard boil is also going to help get the sweetness from the peppers out even more and give you a richer, deeper flavor. All right, I'm going to keep that going. Any other questions while we're finishing up, bringing this to a boil and keeping it stirred? Kristen, any questions from online?
We did have one. It was about processing. Do you have to use an aluminum pot or do you need to use a stainless steel pot?
That is a great question. Always, 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 with high acid foods in particular, you want to make sure that you're using a stainless steel pot. What happens is when the acid comes into contact with something like an aluminum or other metals, it will cause some of it to leach out, and that just creates for a really kind of bad, bitter flavor in your food, and it's not going to be good for you over time if that's what you're eating is aluminum pot that's breaking down. So stainless steel is definitely the thing that you want to use. And again, both the canner, the stock pot that I'm using for my canner, and my stock pot that I'm using to make the actual jelly in has a really hardy bottom, and that's going to help distribute the heat evenly all throughout both the processing in the jar as well as the jelly that is coming to a very heavy boil right now. Some of the new recipes with jellies and jams, Jessica mentioned this earlier with the Fresh Tech jelly and jam maker, is there has been the addition of butter or margarine, just a little bit. This is the step where if you are adding that, you want to add that here. It is going to help prevent a lot of the foam from building up as all of this is rising and coming to a full boil in your pot. If you don't want to add it, not a problem. Just be prepared to skim some of the foam off. But otherwise, again, that fat is going to distribute across the top of your ingredients and help prevent a lot of the foam. Often I get asked, why is foam an issue? Why would you want to either prevent foam or skim the foam? The foam, for one, is just presentation. Nobody really wants to see their jar of beautiful pepper jelly that you've worked so hard to make with this fluffy white stuff on the top. You also want to remove your foam because if there was any bits of the pepper that started to break down or come off during this actual gelling process, it's going to float on the top and make for a very cloudy consistency on the top of your jelly in your jar. All right, now that we've done that for our 3 minutes, we're going to turn off our heat and it's time to fill our jars. So again, I've got a couple canning specific utensils. I've got my jar lifter. We are using the 8-ounce jelly jar today. Our jar lifter, I just put it over the top of my jar and tilt to get the water out. This jar has been nicely sterilized and it's ready to go. With my jar funnel, I can start to fill my jars. You want to use a damp washcloth in order to hold on so your hand doesn't get too hot on there. And with your funnel in there, you're just going to pour that jelly down in. I will let you know that jelly, it's still really hot. So when you pour it in, don't freak out. It's not going to look like the prettiest, thickest consistency of jelly that you may hope for. That's because everything's still heated up. As it cools down and settles in the jar, it's going to come together as your actual gel consistency. Filling our jars, we are, with this recipe, going to a 1/4 inch headspace. Again, in the Discovery Canning Kit, we have a measurement already marked for us. So we're going to find where that 1/4 inch, we're going to put that 1/4 inch line at the top of the jar and make sure that our jelly comes up but not over where the bottom of the book is. So it looks like I need to add a little bit more. And if you happen to overfill it, not a problem. Just use, for example, like the plastic spoon that we use to get the seeds out of our pepper. You can use that to scoop out the overage. Looks like we're good. Now, we've worked so hard to make our jelly. One of the things that people often forget to do is wipe the rim of the jar. Even though I used the funnel and it kept my jar nice and clean and it didn't cause a lot of spillage, chances are there's still a little bit on there. So I'm going to take my damp washcloth and wipe around the rim a couple of times, trying to use a new clean bit of the rag each time. Once that's nice and clean, I'm going to take my lid. If you notice, I just have my lid sitting here on a towel. You don't need to keep those in a canner or a crock pot heating up like you do the jars. They've done some tests recently at Jardin and found that it's just an unnecessary step. It saves you a little bit of time. I'm putting my 2-piece lid on there. The actual lid part is going to pop. It's going to actually come down, and that's the sealing for the jar. That's a 1-piece use item. Only one time is all you're ever going to want to use for it. The jar and the second piece of the lid, the band, you can use over and over again as long as you've checked it for chips or cracks or bends or anything like that. Now, I mentioned the other tool that we have here is our Sure-Tight band tool. I'm going to put that on my lid, close it down. Really, really hot with jelly, so you want to make sure that you're using something to hold it. And then there are 2 arrows marked on the handle here. I'm just going to turn until those 2 arrows meet up, and that lets me know that I have successfully tightened that as much as it's needed. I'm going to lift this up, and then I mentioned instead of using a traditional hot water bath canner, today we're using the Ball Discovery canning kit. And I'm going to put my jar inside the basket, let the basket go down to the bottom of the pot. If I were going to continue to actually can, of course I'd fill my other jars, wipe the rims, put the lids on, use the jar lifter and put that in there. Once they're all in there, we're processing this jelly for 10 minutes. That is 10 minutes from the point of boil. So another good thing that you want to make sure you have, or that can help, is a see-through lid on your stock pot. So that way, once the lid's on, you watch it. Once it comes to a boil, you start your 10-minute processing time. Ding, your timer goes off. Turn off the heat and just let it sit for 5 minutes. You're probably excited, you're probably ready to take everything out of there, but give it a chance to just sit and rest. Sugar is very hot. Everything that's in that pot is really hot. You don't want to risk taking it out in your air-conditioned kitchen and having thermal shock, having that really hot, intense jar meet the cold air conditioning. So let it sit for 5 minutes. Then when you're ready, take the lid off. And good thing about this plastic handle is it's nice and cool. You just lift that out, and you can put that onto your counter where your towels are. And then you can use your jar lifter to get each of your jars out from there. Or if you want, you can leave that in there and then just use your jar lifter to lift them out either way. I always recommend to people that when it comes time to move your jars and sit them out, just sit them either on your countertop or on a towel 12 to 24 hours, and that's going to ensure that everything cools down and that you do come up with a good seal. How you're going to check for your seal is take that band off, use it for your next canning project, give a little lift. If this thing is on there, then you did your job well. The other way to check is press in the middle. If it's not giving, if it's not popping up and down, then you know that your jar has successfully been sealed. For any purpose that your jar isn't sealed, all you have to do is you can either reprocess it again, just take off this lid and use a new one, wipe down that rim before you do, or you can pop it in your refrigerator and it's going to last for 3 weeks. But otherwise, your sealed jar can now go in your pantry, and if it lasts that long, if you don't give it to friends or eat it up for a party, it can hang out in your pantry for a good year, and it's still going to be just as delicious today or a year from now. So that's our pepper jelly, and while I pack some things up, do we have any questions? Yes. We'll let Kristen come over and...
Can you make this recipe in your new machine?
Yes, I'm so glad you asked. So if you didn't hear, she wanted to know, can this recipe be made in the Fresh Tech jelly and jam maker? It certainly can. The Fresh Tech is just going to do all the stirring, and it's going to take care of mixing all the ingredients together for you. You still go through the steps of canning it, of actually ladling it and putting it into the jars, waiting for the machine to come out that does all of it for you. But in the meantime, yes, that will make all of the jelly for you, and you don't have to worry about having the stock pot to stir and stand there. They'll do the job for you. Holly's coming around with some samples for you to taste with the pepper jelly on some cream cheese and some crackers. That's one of the easiest ways that you can enjoy this lovely recipe. Another way that you can is something that I'm going to leave to somebody else to tell you about.